A millionaire watches from a distance as a nun teaches his son to dance. Intrigued, he can't understand how this happened without his knowledge. As he investigates further, he discovers an unexpected secret about his own past. What he learns will forever change his view on faith and family. If this story interests you, subscribe to the channel to receive all our exciting stories. Continuing. The sun had barely risen when Ethan Miller Thompson was already up, adjusting his navy blue tie in front of the mirror. His fingers methodically ran over the Italian silk, ensuring the knot was perfectly symmetrical, as everything in his life needed to be. The wall clock marked exactly 6:15 a.m., not a minute more, not a minute less. It had been this way for 15 years, since he took command of Thompson Enterprises, one of the largest business conglomerates in the United States. The mansion in Beverly Hills, with its 16,000 square feet of built area, was a monument to order and predictability. Each object had its designated place. Each employee knew exactly their functions and schedules. The curtains were opened at 6 a.m., coffee was served at 6:30 a.m., and at 7:15 a.m. his driver would be waiting at the main door to take him to the office. It was a symphony of punctuality and precision that Ethan conducted with an iron fist. That morning, as he observed his reflection in the mirror, his dark brown eyes lingered for a moment on the small wrinkles that were beginning to form around his eyes. At 45, his hair still maintained its intense black tone, with only a few grey strands at the temples that he made sure to conceal. His posture was impeccable, the result of years of military discipline inherited from his father, the founder of the Thompson Empire. "Dad?" The hesitant voice of Michael, his 12-year-old son, echoed through the hallway. Ethan adjusted his wristwatch before responding. "Come in, Michael. You're 5 minutes late for breakfast." The boy entered the room already dressed in his uniform from St. Paul's Academy, one of the most prestigious schools in the city. His eyes, identical to his mother's, revealed a mixture of apprehension and resignation that Ethan preferred to ignore. "Sorry, Dad, I was finishing my math homework." Math homework that should have been completed last night during study hours. Ethan sighed, adjusting his suit lapel. "You'll sit with me now to review your weekly schedule." Michael nodded silently, following his father to the dining room where the table was set with millimetric precision. Toast arranged at perfect angles, jelly in small crystal containers, orange juice in glasses that reflected the morning light entering through the French windows. "This week you have physics tutoring on Tuesdays and Thursdays, swimming on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, and on Saturdays." Ethan consulted his electronic planner. "Piano lesson," Michael completed automatically, his voice almost a whisper. "Exactly. And I don't want to receive any more reports about grades below an A. Your history average needs to improve." The silence that followed was filled only by the clinking of cutlery and the distant sound of employees beginning their daily activities. Michael fiddled with his toast without really eating it, a habit that deeply irritated his father. "Eat properly, Michael. We don't create waste in this house." The boy obeyed mechanically, while Ethan checked the stock market quotes on his tablet. The morning routine followed its predictable course, as it always had been since Sarah. Ethan interrupted that thought before it could fully form. There were matters that had no place in his meticulously planned schedule. "Margaret," he called, and the housekeeper appeared promptly. "Make sure Michael gets to school on time today, and I want a detailed report on his activities when I return tonight." "For yes, Mr. Thompson," replied Margaret, casting a compassionate look at Michael, who remained focused on his toast. Ethan stood up, adjusted his jacket, and picked up his Italian leather briefcase. Before leaving, he looked at his son one last time. "Remember, Michael, discipline is the path to success. Your mother—" He hesitated for a moment. "Your mother didn't always understand that, but you're a Thompson. We have standards to maintain." Michael nodded again, his eyes fixed on his plate. Ethan left the dining room towards the main door, where his driver was already waiting. Another day began exactly as planned, without surprises, without deviations. That's how things should be. What Ethan didn't know was that, on that same morning, a person would arrive at St. Paul's Academy, someone who would challenge every rule, every certainty that he had so meticulously built. Someone who, unknowingly, would cause the first crack in the walls he had erected around his heart and his perfectly organized life. St. Paul's Academy was a century-old institution that prided itself on its traditions. Its stone corridors, filled with colorful stained glass windows and portraits of former principals, had witnessed the education of generations of students from the Los Angeles elite. That morning, an unusual figure was crossing the main courtyard. Sister Grace, with her navy blue habit and a serene smile on her lips, carried a small suitcase while being guided by the principal, Mother Constance. "As you can see, Sister Grace, we maintain the highest standards of excellence," explained Mother Constance, gesturing towards the impeccable facilities. "Our chapel is used daily for prayers, and we hope that your presence will strengthen our spiritual mission even further." Sister Grace, however, seemed more interested in the students crossing the courtyard than in the school's secular architecture. Her eyes, a deep green that contrasted with the simplicity of her religious attire, carefully observed each child passing by. It was then that she noticed a boy sitting alone on a bench, absorbed in a book. "That's Michael Thompson," commented Mother Constance, following the new nun's gaze. "Son of one of our biggest benefactors. Excellent student, but—" She hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "Quite reserved since his mother left us." Sister Grace nodded, but something in her expression changed as she observed the boy. There was a spark of recognition, as if she saw something familiar in that solitude. "I understand that besides religion classes, you'll also be responsible for the students' spiritual guidance," continued Mother Constance. "Yes," replied Grace, her soft voice carrying a slight accent that suggested years lived abroad. "I believe there are many ways to nurture a child's soul." The bell rang, announcing the start of classes. Michael put away his book and walked towards his classroom, passing close to the two religious women. It was then that Sister Grace noticed something that others might not perceive, the almost imperceptible rhythmic movement of the boy's feet, as if responding to music only he could hear. Later that same day, Grace was organizing the small chapel when she heard a sound coming from the adjacent multi-purpose room. It was a soft melody, played on the old piano that stood in the corner of the room. She approached silently and saw Michael alone, fingering the keys with evident disinterest. "Bach?" she asked, making the boy jump in surprise. "Sorry, sister," Michael stammered, quickly standing up. "I should be practicing, but your heart isn't in the music," Grace completed, approaching the piano. "At least not in this type of music." Michael looked at her curiously. There was something different about this nun, something he couldn't explain. She sat at the piano and, to his surprise, began to play. It wasn't Bach nor Mozart nor any other classical piece that his teacher insisted he learn. It was something more contemporary, more alive. "Sometimes," said Grace, her fingers dancing over the keys, "we need to find our own music, the one that makes our heart dance." "My dad says dancing is a waste of time," Michael murmured, but his eyes were fixed on the graceful movements of the nun's hands. Grace smiled, a smile that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. "Has your father ever seen someone really dance? Not just move, but truly dance?" Michael shook his head. Grace stood up from the piano and, in a fluid movement that seemed to defy the rigidity of her habit, executed a few ballet steps. The boy watched open-mouthed as she transformed the space around her into an imaginary stage. How do you know how to dance like that?" he asked, fascinated. "We all have a past, Michael," she replied, returning to her serene posture. "And sometimes that past teaches us exactly what we need to help others find their way." The bell rang again, signaling the end of the free period. Michael hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave that magical moment. "Tomorrow," Grace said softly, "if you want, I can show you more. There's a small garden behind the chapel that few people know about." Michael nodded enthusiastically, a genuine smile lighting up his face for the first time that day. As she watched him leave, Grace felt a familiar restlessness in her chest. That boy needed more than piano lessons and perfect grades. He needed to find his own voice, his own dance. In the solitude of the chapel, Grace knelt before the altar. "Lord," she whispered, "I know you brought me here for a reason. Help me not to make the same mistakes of the past. Help me guide this boy without him having to go through what I went through." The silence of the chapel was her only answer, but Grace knew she had begun something that she could no longer stop. Fate had placed Michael in her path, and she recognized in him the same dormant passion that had once defined her own life. The small garden behind the chapel was a hidden oasis. Within St. Paul's Academy, climbing roses ascended the ancient stone walls, and an old set of wooden benches rested under the shade of a century-old jacaranda tree. It was there that, the following afternoon, Michael found Sister Grace waiting for him. "I thought you wouldn't." "Come," she said, smiling as she saw the boy approaching, hesitantly. "I had to make up an excuse for Margaret," confessed Michael, looking over his shoulder. "I said I had extra math class." Grace noticed the guilt in the boy's eyes. "Sometimes, Michael, we need to create small spaces of freedom to discover who we really are. Here it's not a lie. You're going to learn something new today." The garden was protected by high walls covered in ivy, creating an intimate and safe space. Grace took a small portable radio from her bag and placed it on one of the benches. "Before we begin," she said, sitting down and indicating for Michael to do the same, "tell me about your mother." The question caught the boy by surprise. Nobody talked about his mother, especially his father. It was as if Sarah Thompson had become a forbidden name within the walls of the mansion. She liked to dance," Michael murmured, his fingers nervously playing with the hem of his uniform. "Not professionally, but sometimes when Dad wasn't home, she would turn on the radio and dance with me in the living room. I was little, but I remember her smile." Grace observed a solitary tear run down the boy's face. "And how do you feel?" "When you dance, Michael?" "I don't dance anymore," he quickly replied, as if reciting a learned rule. "Dad says I need to focus on my studies and—" "I didn't ask what your father says," Grace gently interrupted. "I asked how you feel." Michael was silent for a long moment, as if searching for words to express something that had never been allowed to be said out loud. "I feel her," he finally whispered. "I feel like she's with me again." Grace stood up and extended her hand to Michael. "Then let's dance with her today." She turned on the radio, from which a soft classical melody began to play. With fluid movements, she began to demonstrate the basic steps of ballet. Michael watched, fascinated, the way she managed to make each movement seem natural and graceful, even wearing the religious habit. "Ballet is more than a dance," Grace explained, gently adjusting Michael's posture. "It's a way of telling stories with our body. Each gesture, each movement has a meaning." Gradually, Michael began to imitate Grace's movements. His natural coordination surprised the nun. There was a latent talent there, something that went beyond simple muscle memory. "Your mother would be proud," Grace commented, watching Michael execute a perfectly controlled spin. "You have her gift." "How do you know?" Michael asked, stopping abruptly. Grace hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her next words. "Let's say I've known many dancers throughout my life. I recognize innate talent when I see it." The afternoons in the secret garden became a daily ritual. Michael invented different excuses for Margaret, who, although suspicious, noticed a positive change in the boy's behavior. He seemed lighter, more present, as if a dormant part of his personality was finally awakening. A month passed, and Michael's progress was remarkable. Grace taught him not only the technical movements, but also the importance of expression, of the emotion that should flow through the dance. "Dance is like a prayer," she explained on a particularly inspired afternoon. "It's a way of connecting with something greater than ourselves." "Is that how you feel when you dance?" Michael asked, curious. A shadow passed over Grace's face. "I don't dance anymore, Michael. Not like that." "Why?" "Some stories are better kept for another time," she replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Now let's work on your arabesque. You're almost getting it." What neither of them knew was that on that same afternoon, One of the school's oldest employees was passing through the corridor adjacent to the garden. The sound of music and the glimpse of a student dancing were enough to generate a buzz that would inevitably reach the wrong ears. Meanwhile, Michael continued his evolution, becoming more and more confident in his movements. Dance had become his refuge, his moment of true freedom. It was as if, in that small garden, protected by ivy-covered walls, he could finally be who he really was. Not just the Thompson heir, but a boy who found in dance a connection with the memory of his mother and with his own essence. Ethan Thompson was in his office on the top floor of Thompson Enterprises headquarters when his secretary announced a call from St. Paul's Academy. His first thought was of concern. Michael had never caused problems at school, always maintaining the exemplary grades expected of him. "Mr. Thompson," Mother Constance's voice sounded hesitant on the other end of the line, "we need to talk about some extracurricular activities of Michael's." The businessman felt his stomach tighten. "Any problem with the tutoring classes?" "Not exactly," replied the religious woman. "It has come to my attention that Michael has been spending considerable time with our new spiritual advisor, Sister Grace." Ethan relaxed slightly. Spiritual guidance was acceptable, even desirable to maintain the family's Catholic tradition. "And is that a problem, Mother?" "Well," she paused, "some staff members have reported somewhat unconventional activities during these meetings." "Be more specific, please," Ethan demanded, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in difficult negotiations. "Apparently they have been practicing dance." The silence that followed was dense enough to be cut with a knife. Ethan felt his face heat up, a mixture of anger and unwanted memories invading his mind. "This is unacceptable," he finally declared, his voice controlled but trembling slightly. "I will arrange for Michael to be immediately transferred to private tutoring at home." "Mr. Thompson," Mother Constance interrupted, "if I may, I have observed a positive change in Michael. He's more sociable, more participative in classes. Perhaps—" "You don't know my son like I do," Ethan cut her off, "nor do you know our family history. I appreciate the information, but I'll handle this personally." He hung up the phone with more force than necessary, making his secretary jump in the anteroom. He stood up and walked to the panoramic window, observing the city of Los Angeles stretching to the horizon. How dare that nun interfere in the education he had so carefully planned for his son? Memories that he struggled to keep buried began to emerge. Sarah, his wife, dancing through the mansion's living room, her loose hair capturing the late afternoon light. Sarah trying to convince him to let Michael take dance classes as a child. Sarah arguing with him about the importance of art in education. No, he muttered to himself, pushing away the memories. He wouldn't allow his son to follow the same path that had led his wife to. No, he wouldn't think about that. Not now. Meanwhile, in the school garden, Michael and Grace continued their meetings, oblivious to the approaching storm. On that particular afternoon, the boy was especially excited. "Sister Grace, look," he exclaimed, executing a sequence of movements he had secretly practiced in his room. Grace watched, amazed, as Michael had not only mastered the choreography she had taught, but added his own creative elements. "Michael, that was extraordinary. I dreamed about Mom last night," he confided, sitting down next to the nun. "She was dancing with me like before, but this time I could really keep up with her." Grace felt her heart tighten. More and more, she saw in Michael the same love for dance that had once defined her own life. But she also recognized the signs of a talent that would need much more than secret lessons in a garden to fully bloom. "Michael," she began carefully, "there's a youth dance festival happening next month. I thought that maybe." "Impossible," he interrupted, his face losing its joyful glow. "Dad would never allow it." "Sometimes," said Grace, choosing her words carefully, "we need to have the courage to show who we really are. Your mother would understand that." "Did you know my mother?" Michael asked, his eyes wide with surprise. Grace seemed momentarily disconcerted. Not directly, but let's say we shared the same passion. Before Michael could ask more questions, the school bell rang, announcing the end of the period. "We'll continue tomorrow," Grace promised, but something in her voice sounded different, as if she too held her own secrets and fears. What neither of them knew was that at that exact moment, Ethan Thompson was leaving his office early for the first time in years, determined to find out exactly who this nun was, who dared to awaken in his son the same passions he had tried so hard to suppress after Sarah's departure. The unexpected arrival of Ethan Thompson at St. Paul's Academy caused an immediate stir. Staff and teachers, accustomed to the businessman's imposing presence only at official events, watched apprehensively as he strode through the corridors with determined steps towards Mother Constance's office. "I want to see this Sister Grace now," he demanded, without even properly greeting the principal. Mother Constance, a 70-year-old lady who had dealt with generations of demanding parents, maintained her composure. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps it would be better to schedule a formal meeting." "No," he interrupted, his hands clenched into fists. "I need to speak with her immediately." The meeting was arranged in the school library, a spacious and silent space that at that time of the afternoon was practically empty. Grace was already there when Ethan entered, her navy blue habit contrasting with the dark wooden shelves filled with old books. "You must be Michael's father," she said, standing up to greet him. Her voice was calm, but her green eyes showed a strength that Ethan didn't expect to find. "And you must be the person who's filling my son's head with absurd ideas about dance," he retorted, ignoring the nun's extended hand. Grace slowly lowered her hand but maintained her steady gaze. "Michael has a natural gift for dance, Mr. Thompson, a rare talent that—" "Talent?" Ethan interrupted, his voice laden with bitterness. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know our history, our family." "Perhaps I know more than you imagine," Grace replied, her voice taking on a different tone that made Ethan look at her more closely. "What do you mean by that?" Grace hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the consequences of her next words. "I knew Sarah," she finally revealed. "Not personally, but I saw her dance several times when I had another life." Ethan felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "How?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I was the principal dancer of the Los Angeles Ballet," Grace explained. "Sarah attended our community classes. She had a natural talent, a grace that few possess, and Michael inherited that from her." The businessman staggered to a nearby chair, his legs suddenly weak. "Why are you doing this? Why now?" "I didn't plan any of this," Grace replied, sitting down across from him. "When I came to this school, I didn't know I would find Sarah's son. But when I saw Michael, when I realized he carried the same passion for dance that his mother had—" "Passion?" Ethan interrupted, his voice trembling. It was that passion that consumed her from within, that made her distance herself from everything and everyone, that led her to— "Dance wasn't what hurt Sarah," Grace said softly. "It was the impossibility of being who she really was, of expressing what she felt." Ethan stood up abruptly, his emotions threatening to overflow. "You abandoned your career to become a nun. How can you defend something that you yourself rejected?" "I didn't reject dance," Grace replied, a deep sadness in her voice. "I chose a different path after a difficult moment in my life. But I never stopped believing in the transformative power of art, and your son, Mr. Thompson, needs that transformation." "He needs stability," Ethan argued, "a solid future, an education that—" "He needs his father," Grace interrupted, "a father who sees him as he really is, not as you would like him to be." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken truths and long-repressed emotions. Through the library window, they could hear the distant sound of recess, children laughing and playing, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. "The POA Youth Dance Festival will be next month," Grace finally said. "Michael has the potential to participate, to shine, but he needs your support." Ethan walked to the window, observing the school courtyard without really seeing it. Memories of Sarah dancing through the mansion, of Michael as a baby laughing while she spun him in the air, invaded his mind. "How can I be sure," he asked, his voice almost inaudible, "that I won't lose him too?" Grace approached, stopping beside him. Sometimes, Mr. Thompson, we lose people precisely by trying to keep them trapped in cages we build with our own insecurities and fears. Outside the library, unbeknownst to either of them, Michael was crouched near the half-open door, his heart racing as he discovered not only his teacher's past, but also an unexpected connection with his mother that he had never imagined existed. Morning after the confrontation in the library, the secret garden behind the chapel seemed different to Michael. Each rose, each leaf of the jacaranda tree carried the weight of the revelations he had discovered the day before. When Grace arrived, she found the boy already sitting on the wooden bench, his face pensive, reflecting a maturity beyond his years. "You knew my mother," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Grace stopped in her tracks, surprised. For a moment she considered denying it, but there was something in Michael's look that prevented her from hiding the truth. "You overheard us yesterday," she responded softly, sitting down beside him. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Sometimes, Michael, the truth needs the right moment to be revealed," Grace explained, carefully choosing her words, like a choreography that needs to be built step by step. Michael remained silent for a moment, processing the information. "What was she like? When she danced, I mean?" Grace smiled, her eyes lost in memories. "Your mother had a natural grace that can't be learned in any academy. She danced as if she were conversing with the air itself, as if each movement were a word in a story that only she knew." "Just like in the video," Michael murmured. "What video?" Grace asked, curious. "There's an old video that I found hidden in Dad's office," he revealed. "Mom is dancing on a stage, but it's not a professional show. It looks more like a amateur festival," Grace completed. "It must be from the spring festival where she performed for the last time. I was there that day in the audience. Her performance was..." She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Transcendental." "Why did she stop?" Michael asked, his voice small. Grace took a deep breath. "That's a story your father should tell. But know that your mother never really stopped dancing. She just chose to dance in other ways. With you, for example." The silence that followed was filled by the soft sound of the wind in the jacaranda leaves. Michael played distractedly with the hem of his uniform, a habit that Grace had already noticed was a sign that he was gathering courage to say something important. "I want to participate in the festival," he finally declared, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Your father..." "I know he might not allow it," Michael interrupted. "But I need to try. For Mom. For me." Grace observed the boy with a mixture of pride and concern. In his features, she saw not only Sarah's reflection, but also the same determination that she herself had once had before life led her down unexpected paths. "Michael," she began, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "if you really want to do this, you need to understand that it won't be easy. We'll have only a few weeks to prepare a choreography, and you'll have to train more than ever." "I can do it," he affirmed, his eyes shining with a conviction that Grace knew well. "And your father?" "I'll talk to him," Michael said, surprising Grace with his resolution. "Tonight I'll show him how much this means to me." Grace smiled, recognizing in that moment the birth of something special. Not just a dancer, but a young man finding his own voice, his own courage. "Then," she said, standing up and extending her hand to Michael, "let's begin. We have a lot of work ahead of us." The hours that followed were intense. Grace began to develop a choreography that blended classical ballet elements with more contemporary movements, something that could tell the story not just of Michael, but of the connection he shared with his mother through dance. As they worked, Grace couldn't help but think about her own journey, the stage lights that had once been her home, the choices that led her to exchange ballet slippers for a religious habit, and now the fate that had brought her here to help Sarah's son find his own path in dance. At the end of the rehearsal, when the sun was already beginning to set, Michael seemed exhausted but fulfilled. There was a new light in his eyes, a determination that went beyond the simple desire to dance. "Sister Grace," he called, as they were putting away the small radio, "do you think she would be proud?" "Your mother is already proud, Michael." Grace replied, her voice soft. She always has been, and today more than ever because you're choosing to be true to yourself. Michael nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. That night, he would face one of the most difficult conversations of his life. But now, strengthened by dance and the truth he finally knew, he felt ready to defend his dreams, even in front of the father he so feared disappointing. The Thompson mansion never seemed so imposing to Michael as it did that night. Each step towards his father's office echoed through the silent corridors, amplifying his anxiety. The old video of his mother dancing was tucked in his pocket, a comforting presence that gave him courage. Margaret, the housekeeper, watched with concern as the boy headed to the west wing of the house, where Ethan's private office was located. It was rare for Michael to seek out his father voluntarily, especially at that hour of the night. "Your father is busy, Michael," she gently warned. "Maybe it's better to wait until tomorrow." "No, Margaret," he replied, his voice firmer than it had ever been. "It has to be now." Ethan was sitting in his leather armchair reviewing important documents when he heard the hesitant knock on the door. He looked up, surprised to see his son standing in the doorway. "Michael, did something happen?" "I need to talk to you, Dad," Michael said, entering the office with deliberate steps. "About Mom. About dance." Ethan adjusted himself in his chair, his face instantly hardening. "Michael, we've already talked about this. You're not going to participate in any dance festival." "You kept her video," Michael said, pulling the DVD from his pocket. "Why?" The businessman paled slightly, his eyes fixed on the disc his son was holding. It was a recording he hadn't seen in years but didn't have the courage to get rid of. "Where did you find that?" "In the bottom drawer of your desk," Michael admitted. "I know I shouldn't have gone through your things, but why did you keep it if you hate dance so much?" Ethan slowly stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the garden. For a long moment, only the ticking of the antique clock filled the silence. "I don't hate dance, Michael," he finally said, his voice softer than usual. "I fear for you. I fear that you'll lose yourself like she lost herself." "Mom didn't lose herself in dance," Michael protested, approaching his father. "Sister Grace told me what she was like when she danced, how she shone." "Sister Grace," Ethan murmured, a touch of bitterness in his voice. "She also had her history with dance, didn't she? And where is she now? Hidden behind a religious habit?" "She's not hidden," Michael defended. "She found a new path, just like Mom found a new way to dance and with me." Ethan turned to face his son, surprised by the maturity in his words. For the first time he noticed how Michael had grown, how his eyes, so similar to Sarah's, carried an understanding beyond his years. "Can I show you something?" Michael asked, indicating the DVD player in the corner of the office. After a moment of hesitation, Ethan nodded. Michael inserted the disc, and seconds later, Sarah's image filled the screen. She was on the stage of the Los Angeles Theater, wearing a simple dress, but her presence was magnetic. The music began, and with it, the magic happened. "Look how she smiles, Dad," Michael whispered, his eyes fixed on the screen. "That's how I feel when I dance, like nothing else matters, like she's with me again." Ethan watched in silence, his heart tight with long-suppressed memories. Sarah spinning across the stage, her expression of pure joy, the way the light seemed to dance with her. "She rehearsed for weeks for this performance," he said softly, surprising Michael. "She would wake up early every day to practice before you woke up. She said it was her special moment with dance." "Did you go to see her dance?" "Always," Ethan admitted, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Even when I said I was too busy, I would sit in the back of the theater so she wouldn't see me. She was extraordinary." Michael moved closer to his father, gathering all his courage. "The festival is in 3 weeks," he said. "Sister Grace thinks I'm ready, that I can do something special." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, the sound of the music from the video filling the room. When he opened them again, there was something different in his gaze. "You really want this, don't you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "More than anything, Dad," Michael replied. "Not for the trophy or the recognition, but because when I dance I feel closer to her, closer to who I really am. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. On the screen, Sarah finished her performance with a perfect spin, her smile illuminating the entire theater. Ethan observed his son, no longer the shy boy who desperately tried to please him, but a young man who was beginning to find his own voice. "If I allow this," he began slowly, "you'll need to keep your grades up, and I want to attend the rehearsals." Michael's face lit up with a joy that Ethan hadn't seen in years. "You'll watch me dance?" "I'll do more than that," Ethan replied, surprising himself. "I'll help you tell your story. Our story." The days that followed the conversation in the office brought subtle but significant changes to the Thompson mansion. The backyard, previously an almost abandoned space, was transformed into an improvised rehearsal area. Ethan had a special dance floor installed and mirrors put up on the walls, surprising both Michael and Sister Grace. "I can't risk you getting hurt training on an inadequate floor," he explained when Michael questioned the change. "Your mother always said that the right environment makes all the difference." Grace watched with admiration the transformation not just of the space, but mainly of the relationship between father and son. During rehearsals, Ethan would sit quietly in a corner, his eyes attentive to every movement, every expression of Michael's. "He has her natural port de bras," Ethan commented one afternoon, using the technical ballet term with a familiarity that surprised Grace. "You know quite a bit about dance," she observed. 15 years of watching Sarah rehearse and perform," he replied, a melancholic smile on his lips. "You learn a lot, even when you pretend not to care." The choreography that Grace created for Michael was a contemporary piece that blended elements of classical ballet with more modern movements. The music, carefully chosen, was an instrumental version of a song that Sarah used to sing to Michael when he was a baby. "It's perfect," Ethan said when he heard the music for the first time. "She used to sing that every night before putting him to bed." The rehearsals were intense. Michael discovered muscles he didn't know existed, and there were days when the fatigue seemed impossible to overcome. But there was something different. Now a purpose, a strength, that came not just from within but from the support that surrounded him. Margaret, the housekeeper, adjusted meal times to accommodate the training sessions and began preparing special snacks rich in protein and carbohydrates, following nutritional guidelines that Ethan obsessively researched on the internet. "I don't want him fainting from hunger in the middle of a grand jeté," he explained, using another ballet term that made Grace smile. One afternoon during a rehearsal break, Michael found his father rummaging through an old box in the mansion's attic. "What's that, Dad?" Ethan pulled out a pair of dance shoes from the box, the leather worn from use but still well preserved. "They were your mother's," he said softly. "Her last pair before she stopped dancing," Michael completed, taking the shoes with reverence. "Before she decided that being a mother was her most important dance," Ethan corrected. "She never really stopped, Michael. She just changed her stage." The shoes were placed in a place of honor in the new improvised studio. Silent reminder of the legacy that Michael carried. As the festival approached, anxiety began to grow. Michael had nightmares about forgetting the choreography or tripping on stage. Grace realized she needed to work not just on his technique, but also on his confidence. "Close your eyes," she instructed during a particularly difficult rehearsal. "Don't dance for the audience, don't dance for the judges, dance for her." "How did you do it?" Michael asked, curious. "When you were on stage?" Grace was silent for a moment, lost in her own memories. "I danced for God," she finally answered, "and now through you, I continue to dance." A week before the festival, Ethan surprised everyone by bringing a specially commissioned costume for the performance. It was a simple but elegant outfit, in shades of blue that resembled the sky at dusk, Sarah's favorite time to dance. "I had it made based on a sketch I found among her things," he explained. It was a costume she had imagined but never got to wear. Michael tried on the outfit, and the image reflected in the mirror was almost surreal, as if past and present merged into a single image. "It's perfect," Grace whispered, her voice choked with emotion. That night after rehearsal, Ethan found Michael sitting in the garden, still wearing the costume, looking at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting down next to his son. "Do you think she'll see me dance?" Michael asked, his voice small in the quiet night. Ethan put his arm around his son's shoulders, pulling him close. "She never stopped watching, son. Never stopped dancing with you." The last words hung in the night air, carrying with them the weight of memories, dreams, and promises. The festival was coming, and with it, Michael's chance to not only perform but to reconnect 3 generations through dance, past, present, and future, united in a single choreography of love, loss, and redemption. The Los Angeles Theater was bustling on that Saturday morning. Young dancers of all ages circulated backstage, some warming up, others adjusting costumes, all sharing the same nervous energy that precedes great performances. For Michael, being there was like entering a completely new world and at the same time strangely familiar. This was her favorite dressing room, Ethan said, guiding Michael down a narrow corridor to a small room with an illuminated mirror. "Your mother said the light here was special." Michael entered the dressing room, feeling as if he were crossing a bridge in time. He imagined his mother there years ago, preparing for her performances, dreaming of the future. The blue costume he wore seemed even more significant now. "Nervous?" Grace asked, entering the dressing room. Even in her religious habit, she carried with her the elegant presence of someone who had once inhabited this world. "A little," Michael admitted, trying to control the tremor in his hands as he adjusted the collar of his costume. "You know what your mother used to do when she was nervous before a performance?" Ethan asked, surprising both Michael and Grace. "What?" "She would dance with her feet," he smiled. Sitting in the chair, she would move her feet to the rhythm of the music, as if mentally rehearsing each step. Michael smiled, sitting down and beginning to imitate the gesture described by his father. Somehow, that simple movement made him feel more connected to his mother than ever before. The youth competition was organized by age categories, and Michael would be the last to perform in his category. This meant hours of waiting, observing other competitors through the stage curtains. Some were clearly more experienced, with years of formal training in renowned academies. "They have more technique," Michael whispered, his confidence wavering, as he watched a boy his age execute an impressive series of pirouettes. "And you have something they don't," Grace replied, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You have a story to tell." The hours passed slowly. Ethan alternated between obsessive checks of Michael's costume and nervous walks down the corridor. Margaret, who had insisted on coming to watch, distributed water and words of encouragement to everyone. Finally, the moment arrived. Michael was standing in the wings, his heart beating so hard it seemed to want to leap out of his chest. The last competitor was leaving the stage to enthusiastic applause. "Michael," Ethan called, approaching his son. For a moment, father and son just looked at each other, years of distance and misunderstanding dissolving in that instant. "I know, Dad," Michael smiled. "Maintain posture. Remember to breathe." "No," Ethan interrupted, his voice choked. "I just wanted to say that. Your mother would be very proud. I am very proud." Before Michael could respond, the announcer's voice echoed through the theater. "And now our last competitor in the youth category, Michael Thompson." Grace made the sign of the cross, her eyes shining with contained tears. "Go, my dear, the stage is yours." Michael walked to the center of the stage, the spotlight creating a golden circle around him. The audience was just a dark mass beyond the light, but he knew that somewhere out there was his father, Margaret, and somehow his mother too. The music began, the first notes of the lullaby his mother had loved so much filling the theater. Michael closed his eyes for a brief moment, took a deep breath, and began to dance. Each movement told a part of the story. The first steps spoke of loss and longing. The spins expressed the search for identity. The leaps celebrated the discovery of joy through dance. The choreography that Grace had created unfolded like a silent conversation between past and present. In the audience, Ethan watched with his heart in his throat. He didn't just see his son on stage. He saw Sarah. He saw the love that had united them He saw the years lost in fear and rigidity, transforming into something new and beautiful through Michael's dance. The audience was in absolute silence, hypnotized by the performance. Even the other competitors and their trainers had stopped to watch, recognizing that they were witnessing something special. When Michael executed the final movement, a gentle spin that ended with his arms extended to the sky, exactly as his mother used to do, the entire theater held its breath. For a moment, time seemed suspended, as if the universe itself paused to honor that moment of pure truth and connection. And then, the theater erupted in applause. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold that resembled the stage lights of the Los Angeles Theater. In the Thompson Mansion's garden, now transformed into a small dance studio, Michael practiced his movements with new confidence, while Ethan and Grace watched from the veranda. "He hasn't stopped dancing since the festival," Ethan commented, a soft smile on his lips. "Dance has that effect on us," Grace replied. "Once it truly touches us, it becomes part of who we are." The festival had been just a week ago, but it seemed like a lifetime had passed since then. Michael hadn't won first place. That went to a boy with years of formal training. But he had received something much more valuable, the special jury award for artistic expression and originality. "How your performance reminded us why we dance," one of the judges had said, her eyes misty. "Not for perfect technique or competition, but for the pure joy of telling a story through movement." Now, watching his son dance in the garden, Ethan finally understood what Sarah had always tried to tell him. Dance wasn't a distraction or a hobby. It was a form of language as fundamental as words or music. "Sister Grace," Michael called, interrupting his movements, "can I show you something I'm creating?" "Of course, dear." Michael began a new sequence. Her movements, something completely different from what he had presented at the festival. It was freer, more personal, blending elements of what Grace had taught him with something entirely his own. "It's for her," he explained, finishing the sequence. "For Mom. I'm calling it Conversations with the Sky." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He stood up and walked to his son, placing his hands on his shoulders. "You know," he began, his voice soft, "I found some more of your mother's things in the attic. Videos of other performances, some costumes." He paused. "And the plans for a small dance school she dreamed of opening one day." Michael's eyes widened. "A school?" "Yes. She wanted to create a space where any child could learn to dance, regardless of whether they had previous experience or not." Ethan looked at Grace. "Actually, I was thinking, maybe we can make her dream come true." Grace blinked, surprised. "Mr. Thompson, the mansion's annex is empty," he continued. "With some renovations, it could become an excellent studio, and we would need someone with experience to direct the classes." He left the sentence hanging, looking meaningfully at Grace. "But my vows," she began. "I've already spoken with Mother Constance," Ethan interrupted. "She believes that teaching dance can be a form of ministry, of touching lives, through art, as you did with Michael." Grace felt tears in her eyes. After so many years running from her past with dance, the universe had found a way to bring her back, not to the stage, but to something equally meaningful. "What do you think, Michael?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the gleam in the boy's eyes. "We could call it Sarah Thompson School of Dance," he suggested, his voice overflowing with enthusiasm. Ethan smiled, looking at the darkening sky. Somewhere he was sure Sarah was smiling too. "You know," he said, surprising everyone by taking off his jacket and rolling up his shirt sleeves, "your mother once tried to teach me some basic steps. I guess it's never too late to learn, is it?" Michael laughed, radiant, as Grace turned on the music. In the Thompson Mansion's garden, father and son began to dance together for the first time, their movements awkward but sincere, as the first stars appeared in the sky. The nun watched, the scene with a full heart. Her own journey with dance had been a story of love, loss, and redemption. Now, through Michael and the future school, this story would gain new chapters, new characters, new dances. Margaret appeared on the veranda with a tray of lemonade, smiling at the unusual sight of her employer trying to keep up with his son's steps. "The mansion seems alive again," she commented, serving a glass to Grace. "No," the nun gently corrected, "it's dancing again." And so, under the starry sky of Los Angeles, the story that had begun with a boy dancing secretly in a school garden transformed into something greater, a celebration of love, art, and the courage to be true to oneself. Sarah Thompson might no longer be physically present, but her dance lived on, echoing through generations, reminding everyone that some stories are best told, not with words, but with the heart in motion.